chain thing that's bedeviling everybody. So it's going to take quite a while to clean this thing up.
It's going to take quite a while indeed. Well, let's take a look at what we're looking at here, and without necessarily going to years, but just once again, let's take a look. This is a song you wrote at the age of 24. And were you saying, do you think, bye-bye to the American dream? Because after the assassination of JFK, when you were a late teen at that stage, you realised whatever promise there had been in the late 40s throughout the 50s, it was kind of probably, maybe it died with Kennedy.
Well, I was interested in some blacklisted artists when I was even in junior high school. And I wrote away to Washington to get transcripts from the House on Un-American Activities Committee.
Yeah.
And my mother was there when this box arrived from the government. And she said, "Donnie, what is this?" And I said, "Oh, it's just transcripts from Congress. I want to read some stuff." And that's the kind of thing I would do. And so I was already a little skeptical about things. And then when the Kennedy assassination happened, I read this book by Mark Lane called Rush to Judgment. And Mark Lane wrote basically a brief in the defense of Lee Harvey Oswald. In other words, as if he were acting as his attorney. Yeah. And he made a movie as well. So I had a skepticism about the reality of America rather than what was put forward, and what people think. I became I guess an assassinologist, you might say. So I think that with the death of Kennedy, I think that people just started doubting everything, and they didn't really stick with the program anymore. And that's when, at the same time, it's like a perfect storm. The civil rights movement exploded. Martin Luther King was murdered. Robert Kennedy was trying to step in and maybe smooth things over. He got assassinated. So there was a lot of bad stuff, which I consider to be state crimes.
Yeah.
And so this was Don McLean. This was my thinking, and I was not in sync with other kids or other people, who didn't think that way. And so, that's the reason I started, I think, working with Pete Seeger, who was a communist in the 1960s, and he was involved in this environmental movement to try to save the Hudson River. And I learned a lot from him. And I learned a lot of stuff from him that I didn't believe. There were things I didn't like about him either. But I certainly did learn a lot about the subjects that interested me. And I'm still anti-war after all this time. I don't see any point in any of these conflicts that we've put our boys and girls into and the damage we've done to those countries. I think that's the main thing that I'm still very active about and very angry about, really. And the problem is that we get all this distraction. There's always this thing, it's sexual stuff or politically correct stuff or whatever. Meanwhile, they're killing these people over in these countries, and we're not saying anything about that, and that's what I think they should be saying. So, yes, I think that Eisenhower warned us about what would happen if the military-industrial complex took over. They have taken over, and I think that is the death of some kind of an American dream, and I think that some of that is in the song for sure.
But when you're talking about Eisenhower like that in the 50s and that, like when Americans supposedly never had it so good, the white picket fences and all the rest of it, the way of living. First of all, I just want to ask something about the music there, because there's a certain kind of music that people never look back on and praise in a big way, and that's kind of 1955 to 60. In other words, your teenage years, and bands like the Platters and the Monotones and Frankie Lyman and the Heartbeats and the Cleftones and the Jet Vikings, all those stuff.
It's all my favorite stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of Bobby Sox and a Ponytail, it's American Graffiti, it's high school romance stuff, but it's brilliant music. Were you listening to that music, taking anything from that at all in terms of, maybe there is now for the first time ever a thing called a teenage audience, and there's people doing stuff for me?
Well, the word teenager was a coined word that had to do with this gross number of people that were created after the war.
Yeah.
Baby boomers, they grew up to be teenagers in this gigantic buying ball. So suddenly, Madison Avenue was paying attention to this group of people who were this young consumers, and that's why they got called teenagers. Yeah. But this was our music, and it was coming from us. This is a wonderful thing. Prior to that, everything came from the top down. You know, you had the expert songwriters and the expert singers.
Yeah, but it was more geared towards adults, wasn't it?
Now, what you're talking about comes from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Now you got Frankie Lyman, you know, and his brother, you know, Louis Lyman, singing in the, you know, in the stairwell, and you got, you know, Mr. Lee, the Bobettes, talking about their teacher, Mr. Lee, in school.
Yeah.
And it's coming from the bottom up. Fashion started coming from the bottom up rather than from the top down, too. So it was a natural thing that you would have revolution, in a sense, in terms of civil rights and anti-war and everything else, because the bottom was energized.
Well, then, with the song American Pie and the amount of people that have added stuff to it, you must be looking down through the years and going, oh, wow, okay, like a lot of those things I was singing about, but was I singing about all those too? And that goes to the Vietnam War, Social Revolution, Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley, JFK, Mick Jagger, Charles Manson, Hells Angels, the Beatles, hallucinogenic drugs, God, the devil. Are they all in there?
They could be.
You see, you've learned how to.
They certainly should be.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it.
If they're not, they should be. That's what I'm saying.
Well, let's break it down a little bit. Would you think that the real genius of the song is the structure and not necessarily the words? And not enough people look at it that way. I mean, it's a perfect fusion of folk and rock and roll and old-fashioned pop music. The slow intro is the pop part, piano kicks in, the tempo speeds into the chorus, then rock and roll. Is that how you?
That's exactly right. I mean, you're the only person that ever said that exactly correctly. Because there's only three kinds of music that I understand. And I'm very simple. I'm a simple guy. I don't care about anything I don't care about. And I love what I love. And I love old-fashioned popular music. I love rock and roll, the kind that you're talking about. And I love folk music. And I love the aspects of folk music were very important. They found their way into popular music primarily because of the Weavers in 1948 began to mainline songs like the Midnight Special and Irene Goodnight and the Rock Island Line and the Sloop John B. and Wimoweh and Wimoweh is interesting. They talk about woke now. They use that word as if suddenly they've been awakened. Well, the song Wimoweh is "The Lion Sleeps Tonight." The idea of that is that the lion is sleeping, and that's the people, but the lion will wake up, and everything will change. So that's really what Wimoweh is about. There were a lot of songs that the Weavers sang that had folk meanings about were on the edge of revolution, even though, and then they became pop hits. People didn't really know that, but.
And then you're everybody's from Greenwich Village and Peter Paul and Mary's and all the rest. But the folk component of American Pie, is that just the verse, chorus, verse?